Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in March. I read 10 books in March, if I'm counting correctly. One of them was a play, one of them was a graphic novel, and one of them was a novella, and the rest were novels. Before we talk about the books I read in March, so I do want to quickly mention one that I read in February, but I read it after I filmed my wrap-up, and that was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is my first Agatha Christie novel. Actually, I've been wanting to read her work for a really long time, and apparently I've decided that this is the year I'm going to do it. And Then There Were None, we follow, I think it's 10 we'll say for now, strangers that meet on this island. They've all been invited there by a mysterious person and deaths start occurring essentially. It's one of Agatha's most famous, certainly. I was a little underwhelmed. It was very addictive. I read it in like 2 or 3 days purely because I could not put it down. Like, it was just, I listened to the audiobook. I don't know who it was narrated by. No, I didn't put it in my notes. It was narrated by this person and they did a great job. They had like a very old-fashioned tone which worked really well, I think. And it was very easy to listen to. The writing style was very smooth. I will say it was relatively surface level though. There wasn't anything crazy about it. It was accessible, it was easy to read, but a lot of the characters were quite stereotypical. They felt like, you know, they were easily put into little boxes and nothing they did was kind of out of character. Everything was relatively predictable from them. It just kind of felt flat to me. And the other thing is, it's not one of those where you get little clues that you can kind of piece together to figure out the puzzle. I mean, maybe some people can, but I feel like you'd have to either be really paying attention and looking into every little thing and like really clever. I don't even care if I guess right. I just want to like be able to attempt to guess, and all of my guesses from the very beginning were just shots in the dark because there's no way to figure out. There aren't any hints. They're like little tiny things, but they won't get you very far to actually guessing as to what's going on here. I at one point guessed what it was in quite a broad way and like the motives behind what was going on, but it was just a shot in the dark, and then I like completely flitted past it because it didn't make any sense to me. Like, I was so gung-ho on certain things because nothing else was adding up. It is one of those that, and then you get to the end and it takes the killer and, you know, the person behind it all to like outright say what they've done and why they've done it. I wanted there to be more clues so that I could like actually attempt to figure it out. I was getting very frustrated by that. Yeah, so overall it was kind of middle ground. Like, it was easy and quick to read, very addictive, but I didn't love the mystery, didn't love the characters. It does raise some interesting questions. And there was another thing that at the very beginning I outright predicted and came to very quickly, and it was like so obvious, and maybe it was supposed to be really obvious. I don't know. I didn't love it. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. I think I'd give it like a 6 out of 10, like a solid 3 stars, I think. Definitely gonna read more Agatha's work. That's all I have to say. Okay, and then the first book that I read in March was The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings movies are some of my absolute favourite films. They have been since I was a little kid, and I've been meaning to read the books for so long. And I really want to rewatch the films. It's been a really long time since I have, not since I was like a teenager or something. And so I thought I'd start with The Hobbit. And I got this gorgeous illustrated edition, which is so cute. The illustrations, hang on, let me try and find you my favourite one. Is this one. Look at how cute those illustrations are. I hope the glare is not affected. Oh, and the little dog. They're so cute. And on a whole, it's just like a gorgeous edition. It's cloth bound and there's like nice golden, what do you call this? I don't know, I forget. It's quite sparkly. I listened to the audiobook by this, and it's narrated by Andy Serkis, who plays Gollum in the films, and he's, you know, he's well known for being a voice actor, and he does a fantastic job. It was so amazing. And like the parts where Gollum comes up, like it's Gollum, and he almost did like an impression, I feel like, of some of the actors from the Hobbit films. Like the head dwarf sounded very similar to the head dwarf from the films, and Gandalf sounded like Gandalf, and he just did such a fantastic job and made it so easy and like pleasurable to listen to on like multiple levels. And I highly enjoyed this book. If you don't know anything about the Lord of the Rings, I don't know what to tell you. It's high fantasy. This is like your classic adventure story. What else is there to say other than it's brilliant, obviously. It's so sweet and it's so wholesome. It has definitely that like cozy fancy feeling to it, with like a little bit higher stakes I guess, but at the same time it's children's, so you know it's gonna be okay in the end. Really exciting. It's jam-packed with action and adventure just constantly, and so many different like characters, and it's amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend it if you haven't gotten around to it yet. The Hobbit is much more accessible, I feel like, than The Lord of the Rings, as someone who has yet to read The Lord of the Rings, just from what I've heard people say. But a 9.5 out of 10, just because like I don't know if this is going to go down as like one of my absolute favourite books, but like I can't critique it in any way. Like, it was incredible. So I think I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. Next up was The Flames of Albion by Jean Z. Menzies. Jean is a YouTuber who I'm obsessed with. I love her videos and her content. I'll link her channel down below. And this is her self-published book. It's a hope punk kind of, again, it cozy fantasy vibes, with a little bit of romance. We're following our lead. Oh, I'm not going to be able to pronounce her name. Daria. And she lives in a university. She's an orphan, and this university takes in orphans, and this dragon egg, which is like supposed to be fossilized and really old and is just on display, starts to crack in her presence, and so she kind of like has to be this dragon's companion. It's like it's almost a bit of like an Aragon situation where like dragons have companions, and it like the university is, you know, as a setting is very prevalent, and there's a queer relationship, and it's set in a fantasy world where there's not a monarchy. The monarchy kind of was donezo and the kind of political situation is very prevalent as well. It's also the first of a series which I feel like I'd heard her said once, but we got to the end and I was like, no, this isn't the end. So I am now desperate for the second one. Like, I need to know the bigger scope of what's going on. Characters in here I feel like are one of the strongest points, definitely. I became so attached to them. I actually started tearing up at several points. That's how attached to them I've become, and everything with the dragons I loved the dragons so much, especially in the beginning. They brought me such joy. Like, it is very predictable like who our antagonist is, but then we don't fully know what's going on, but I feel like I know what's going on. But I mean, as cozy fantasy like hope punk, like, is it supposed to be predictable to a degree, like to reduce the stress? Maybe. I don't know, I just don't love that. I like to be surprised, but not so surprised as and then nowhere none. You know, there's a balance. The writing itself could definitely be a bit clumsy. Like, I read this at the beginning of the month, it felt like eons ago. I'm struggling to give you examples. There were definitely the punctuation, like commas were in places where they shouldn't be and then missing from places they should be. Sentence structure wise didn't always make the most sense. I did like the narrative voice that was there though. It did feel like an old school story, and I mean, if like punctuation and sentence structure and stuff like that doesn't bother you, like, it didn't take me out of the story very much. Maybe in the beginning, but then I kind of became acclimatized to it, and so like it didn't actually bother me that much. It's just something that I noticed, so I guess it's up to personal preference. Yeah, it was just a really sweet story that I ended up really enjoying. I think on the whole I'd give it like a 6.5 out of 10. It's an easy fun read which brought me a lot of joy. And then next I read a classic. I've wanted to read more classics this year and I don't think I'd read any yet. I've also not read any short stories or any non-fiction yet this year, so I need to like get on that. But the first classic, I think this is the first classic I've read this year, was Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, and this is my first Anne Bronte novel. I've read Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights by her sisters, and the Brontes definitely are authors that I want to read more of, but the Brontes seem to be like, I think that's my niche. I think they're the ones that I like the most. And I hadn't read any of Anne's work, and I feel like Anne is always done so dirty, so I wanted to amend that. And I also found this stunning edition. Is it focusing? On eBay. It's the Cranford collection hardcover, and it's foiled, and it's relatively basic on the inside. It's got really big, nice readable text though. It looks tiny illustration in the beginning. It's a really nice edition, especially because Anne's work, you can't find that many nice editions, and I think they have a matching one for the Tenant of Wildfield Hall, her other book, so you can get like a matching set. I think she only has the 2 books. It annoys me that you can't get like a full set of all the Bronte's works in like a nice matching edition. What is the book about? We're following Agnes Grey. And this is, I think it's the most like biographical of the three's work, and I think all of them definitely have touches of their experience. Like, you know, Wuthering Heights and the moors are so important, and that's because Emily loved nature and she loved her home and she loved the moors. Charlotte was a governess, and so we have Jane Eyre, who's also a governess, and Agnes Grey is also a governess, just as Anne was. And I think it draws, and like we can hypothesize that was in like different plot points are inspired by things that happened to her and people she met. And we're following Agnes Grey. Her family kind of down on their luck, they've lost their money, and she wants to help, so she decides to become a governess. She struggles. Her first tenants, the first kind of family that she became a part of, they weren't great. It's hard to summarize the plot because it's a very loose plot. Not a lot happens. There's themes of like morality, and Agnes is a very strong Christian, and that comes through a lot, and like what she thinks is moral and just. Those are the big themes, I feel like, the biggest themes that we're pulling from. Oh, I also listened to this one via audiobook, and it was narrated by Amelia Fox, who did a fantastic job. I loved her narration. If I ever find like an audiobook narrated by her in the future, I'm definitely gonna listen to it. It was a really easy read. It was a relatively quick read. I don't think it's as short as it looks, but it is relatively short. That's why I read Agnes Grey, even though I know her other one is obviously more famous, and I think I'll get on with that one better, to be honest. It was a little bland for me. It was fine. It was funny every now and then. I do think the characters were, you know, interesting, layered. We could judge them quite nicely and kind of do deep dives on them, I suppose, and kind of one style of life versus another style of life and morality, and all these themes came through and it just didn't wow me. It was just fine. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this one. I think I'd give it a 6 out of 10. Again, solid 3 stars. Like, it was good, but it wasn't great. And P.S. if your rector throws cats and kicks dogs, maybe he's not the best. Maybe don't take advice from him. Maybe definitely don't accept his marriage proposal. Next up is Elektra by Jennifer Saint. I had read Ariadne in a past. I feel like I'm always talking about how like Ariadne was a bit hit or miss for me. I'm gonna link to a video where I discuss it in more depth down below. On the whole, I enjoyed Ariadne. There was a choice the author made that frustrated me. Elektra. We're following 3 women's stories. I still don't understand why Ariadne is about 2 women, and labeling under 1 woman just kind of makes that woman's story feel like it needs to be pushed to the front and is more important than the other ones. I don't think that's the case. I didn't find that problem with this one though. Right out of the gates, I do think each woman's story is pretty well balanced. We're following Elektra, her mother Clytemnestra, and Cassandra, and all of their stories do kind of weave in quite nicely. So I do think it was really nice getting their different points of views of the events of what's going on, and it felt very cohesive. It felt right, and I loved all of their points of view. They were all so distinct and so grounded, and they just felt so real. And maybe less so Elektra. Cassandra and Clytemnestra, I was so rooting for them the whole time and so deeply attached to them, and I loved reading from their points of view. I mean, Elektra's fine, I struggle with her choices more. It felt so complex. It follows such a giant time span, and it's such a little book. It's only like 300 pages, but it feels like you've read years worth by the end. It's like you think back to the beginning and it kind of took my breath away. It's so well done. The writing is really pretty. I do think it can be a little bit on the nose at times, a little bit like telly rather than showy. It's incredibly rich and incredibly emotional, and enjoyed it. I thought it was so clever. I was so like fully in it. I was transported away. Yeah, I'm struggling to come up with the criticisms. I think Electra's was maybe, her argument felt the loosest to me, but it's a difficult task to justify the way she thinks. And it's one of those things that I understood, but like there were so many arguments I wanted to argue with her. I really enjoyed it. I can't decide if I want to give it an 8 or a 9 out of 10. I'm tempted to give it a 9 because it was so complex, but I don't know if my heart's in it enough. So maybe like an 8.5, I don't know. By the time I edit this video, hopefully I will have decided. It's also got a stunning cover. I love this cover and the color scheme. It has these gorgeous end pages and the spines, the way the spines line up, because Ariadne also has a little like dancing woman on the spine. It's stunning. I cannot wait to have Atalanta in my hands. I cannot wait to read that book. Next up was the novella, and that was Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow. I completely forgot what the book was called. Alex E. Harrow wrote The Once and Future Witches, which I read last year. I love that book. It's probably a new favourite of mine. I'll link the video where I discuss it down below. This is part of the Tor.com novella series, and this is like the first in like a little series. There's only 2 out, and I don't know if there's going to be more or not. The Fractured Fables series, and so I don't know if you can tell from the title, it's like a fairy tale retelling type situation, but it takes place in the 21st century. We're following Zinnia. Zinnia has like a chronic illness and she's always related to the Sleeping Beauty character. She's studied folklore and so she knows all of the different versions. On her 21st birthday, her friend gets like a spindle, it's like a, you know, a Sleeping Beauty type birthday party, and she pricks her fingers and she gets like whooshed away to an actual version of Sleeping Beauty, and she tries to help Sleeping Beauty out. She tries to like help her break the curse and stuff. It's, as you can tell, a very quick read. I listened to it via audiobook. It's narrated by Amy Landon, who was in Verity. She was Verity and so it was really weird hearing her do something very different. But she did a great job. In the end, I really enjoyed it. I would definitely listen to the second one via audiobook. Themes of this book, like with kind of the illness side of it and like what do we want to get out of life, and I can't remember what they were right now because again it feels like a million years since I've read this book. March was very long, really strong, and they could be analysed in a lot of different ways. I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I initially thought I would. I read another short story audiobook by Alex and I didn't love it, but I enjoyed this. I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, it also has illustrations in it, but I only kind of flicked through every now and then because I was listening to it and I don't know how they aligned with the story. Maybe they were kind of telling their own separate story and like, or in like a very kind of abstract way. I don't know. Don't have a ton to say about this one. I enjoyed it. The themes were really interesting. The writing was well done, I think. I didn't feel that strongly towards it again. So I think on the whole I'd give it a 7 out of 10. If it sounds interesting, I'd recommend it. I do know that a lot of people really like this series, and again I'm definitely going to read the second one. I'm interested, I'm invested. Next up was Fight Night by Miriam Toews. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I bought this one, was it in March? I think it was in the beginning of March when I went to Bath. I kind of did like a mini vlog thing, so I'll link that down below. Miriam Toews wrote Women Talking, which I read in January and absolutely loved, and the premise of this one really intrigued me. So we're following like a grandmother, a mother and a daughter all living in the same house. The mother is pregnant and her I don't believe it's her husband, but her like partner has recently left them, from the point of view of the kid mostly, and she's kind of trying to figure out, like, come to peace with the fact that her dad left and she's suspended from school, so she's having these like weird quirky lessons from her grandma and her mum's pregnant, and it's just kind of about their family dynamic. It's one of those that's like, it's about so many things that I couldn't possibly summarize it for you here. It's narrated by Georgia Toews, who I'm assuming is Miriam's daughter, and one chapter is narrated by Miriam herself. The characters were again so strong. They felt so real. They were so complicated and complex and endearing. Endearing as a whole, I feel like perfectly summarizes this book. It's funny and quirky and incredibly well written. Like, we're really grounded in this kid's perspective, and she's a quirky, unique, fun kid. Thought-provoking and honest and kind of philosophical, and it's also kind of heartbreaking and painful at times, but also really hopeful. It's one of those that's a cacophony of so many different things. If the premise intrigues you, if you like literary fiction, if you like books that kind of grapple with the human condition, and especially as well like what it means to be a woman, that because we're following a group of women, that's an important focus, but also just what it means to be human, I would really recommend this one. It's not very long, it's a very quick read. Again, I was really addicted to it and listened to it all the time. I felt so many things towards it. It's so good. It's such a strong novel. I think there's so many beautiful quotes that I had to tab and sections that I really loved. I would give it, I'm gonna say 9.5. I'm really hesitant to like give things 10 out of 10 this year, but I feel like there's a few that in hindsight, including Women Talking, funnily enough, I might end up changing to a 10 out of 10. Between this one and Women Talking, I feel like this one might technically be stronger, but I really love Women Talking, just like the premise of it and what it stands for, so I don't know if Women Talking might be my favourite of the two. Like, they're both so good, and I'm definitely going to read more from Miriam Toews in the future, 100%. So good. I mean, this was a really strong reading month for me, evidently. I feel like I'm, like, even the books that I'm giving relatively low ratings, I'm still saying that I'm really enjoying them. So, in hindsight, I had a really good reading month this month. Next up is Sistersong by Lucy Holland. I've been meaning to read this for years. I bought it the year it came out. I feel like it might be 2021. Along with The Wolf Den and Ariadne, and I'd read both The Wolf Den and Ariadne, and this one was just sitting on my shelf saying, what about me? So I finally got around to reading it. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Robin Holdaway, and I felt like her voice was so familiar. I don't know if it just reminded me of a different narration, kind of similar to the narration of maybe like The Children of Jocasta or something like that. Maybe it was the writing style and the narration combined. I don't know. I didn't know a ton about this one going into it, and I kind of liked that. It's set during the Saxon invasion. It's very heavily rooted in kind of, I guess it would be referred to as pagan. Yeah, British pagan religion and magic is a thing, which I wasn't expecting, and then it came up and I was like, wow, magic, great. And I loved the setting. It was so well done. I felt so heavily situated in the setting and like learning the different festivals and the magic. It's based off of a ballad. It's the Sisters of Troyes. The Troyes sisters is the ballad. Following three siblings. I'll read you this. King Cador's children inherit a land abandoned by the Romans, torn by warring tribes. Riva can cure others but can't heal her own scars. Keen battles to be seen as the king's son, although born a daughter, and Sina dreams of love, longing for adventure. And all of them felt very distinct and complicated and just well done. Keen was easily my favourite. The other two, I mean, it was so interesting to watch out, because on the face of it, Riva and Sina are completely opposites, and then as it goes on, one of them becomes very hypocritical. It's very interesting. You can see all of their reasonings for what they do, definitely. And it's such like a complicated like sibling dynamic that I really enjoyed, and they have like very different experiences and everything. Hey! And my camera cut me off again. We were talking about Sistersong. All of the characters end up having very different stories. They all have different things that come out of it. They're all kind of with the background of this bigger plight of the Saxons. Writing was really nice and very beautiful at times, and the characters were strong, and I really loved the setting and the story as a whole. Biggest problem I had with it though was it was very predictable. About kind of a third of the way in, something happens, and from that incident I could kind of guess the entirety of the plot, more or less, and then from then on adding things up as the story went on. I was like, oh, so this is then going to be this, and it all became very evident to me as what was going to happen, which is, it's a bummer, because if it weren't for that, I honestly think this would be like a 9 out of 10. It's such a strong book and one that I would really love. But because of that, I'm leaning towards giving it more of an 8 out of 10. Bummer. I'd still highly recommend reading it. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Myrddin and Moira, I can't remember her name, was easily faves. The other thing maybe is that the ending, because I knew what was going on for such a long time, I was really able to like build certain grudges, and then in the end I don't know if it paid off in the way I wanted it to. I think it's a really nice ending. I think it makes sense, and I think I can understand how it couldn't really be any other way kind of thing, but I kind of wanted it to be different. The cover is also stunning. We have Riva and Sina and Keen. Love like the gold inlay, and I know that her next book, she's not published anything since, but her next book is kind of following. There's a couple of stories interwoven in this one, and it's one of those stories kind of looked at from a different perspective, like we're kind of in the story, and I'm really interested and really intrigued. I think it's coming out next year, and so I'm very excited for that one, definitely. Yeah, 8 out of 10 I think to Sistersong. Next up was the play that I read this month, another classic, and that is Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I hadn't read a William Shakespeare since I hadn't read a Shakespeare since I think 2021, Troilus and Cressida, which I loved. Or maybe Romeo and Juliet. I want to go through his work, like I want to read all of them eventually. And I'd never read Hamlet. I'd seen Hamlet performed, which I feel like counts, but I'd never like sat down and read it. So now I've read it. Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet, and maybe The Tempest might be his most famous. It has very strong themes. I think to analyze is really interesting. I don't know if it's as complex as some of his others that I've read though. Like I feel like it's all, again, not surface level, but we're dealing with morality, states as a whole, and politics, and familial ties and familial allegiances, supernatural stuff. Do I have to give you the synopsis for Hamlet? We follow Hamlet. He's a prince. His dad is dead and his uncle had just become king, and he married his mom, like his dad's brother. And then his dad's ghost appears and shakes things up. Definitely, I'm very glad I read it. I did find it interesting. I was overall entertained, but I also don't think it's the most entertaining of his. And like, on my list of Shakespeare, I think this is like, it's a middle area. I kind of have similar feelings toward it as I have to Romeo and Juliet, where I can kind of see why it's, you know, such a classic. It's very easy to teach in schools because it's complex, but it's not like insanely complex. Like, it's not like layers on top of layers on top of layers. At least to me, reading it, like if I read it in the classroom, maybe I'd have a very different opinion. I don't know. It was fine. It was good. Was it great? To me, no. Like, compared to all of his other stuff, it's just that he's written, you know, Tortoise and Cressida I love, Othello I love, Macbeth I love, King Lear I love. Like, I just have others that I love and I think are so much more interesting and entertaining and layered, and yeah. I said what I said. I think I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. That feels like blasphemy, but I said what I said. 7 out of 10 to Hamlet. We're getting towards the end now. Next up though is The Sandman Volume 2, The Doll's House by Neil Gaiman, along with some other people. First one took me a really long time to get through, and so I like decided I'm gonna read one issue a week. And I did the same thing with this one, so I started it in like February. I'm intrigued by this world. This world has so much potential. It's so interesting. I'm gonna leave the video I talk about the first one down below. I don't want to like again synopsize it for you here, and I can't really tell you about what this one's specifically about because of spoilers. The biggest thing I found so far though is like between Volume 1 and Volume 2 there's not like a bigger story at play. Like, even in the background they're very much like standalone volumes with their own things going on. And because it's fantasy, like, I'm craving that bigger story arc, and maybe it'll come up soon. I don't know, just I want it. I feel like this one felt a little more coherent than the first one. We have like multiple storylines kind of weaving through, and as a whole, as a package, it made more sense to me, I think. Appreciated that. Found the characters just as intriguing as I did in the first one. I kind of liked the story that was going on here. But apart from the fact that it's nicely packaged and there's kind of like different storylines, I kind of liked the adventure of the first one a little bit more, I think. You know, I would argue that I enjoyed this one more than the first one though, I think. I'm still on the fence of this series as a whole. It didn't wow me again. I found it kind of a chore at times, and I'm still a little confused. I want that bigger story arc that's going to tie everything together. Again, I think I'm going to give it like a 7 out of 10. There's been a lot of 7s and a lot of 9s. It's been a really interesting month. Lastly, the last book that I read this month was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a reread for me. I read it 2021, I'm gonna say. Obviously the TV show has recently come out and I do intend on watching it, so that's why I reread it, so it could be fresh in my mind. And I've been wanting to reread it anyway. I listened to the audiobook, which is, in my opinion, the best way to read this. I've never even tried to sit down and read it physically because the audiobook is that good. It's full cast. If you don't already know, we're following a rock band in the 70s and kind of their rise and their fall through like a series of interviews. We're splicing between different perspectives and different people's versions of events, and it's so well done. The characters feel so real. I become so attached to every one of them. I cry well, both times I've cried. And I'm gonna read you one of my favorite quotes from this book. So if I'm looking over here, I'm sorry, but I feel like it perfectly encapsulates this book, because this quote is very meta. Like, this concept is something that I think about a lot, but this book, like, it does this quote for me, which is what we all want from art, isn't it? When someone pins down something that feels like it lives inside us, takes a piece of your heart and shows it to you. I mean, that quote right there did that for me. 10 out of 10, obviously. If you haven't already read it, I highly recommend you do. Definitely before watching the show. Definitely. And speaking to book to TV show adaptations, I do really quickly want to mention the Essex Serpent TV show, because I finished it in March. I read the Essex Serpent last year. I'll link to the video I discussed that one down below, and I really enjoyed the Essex Serpent. I think I give it a 9 out of 10. It was very strange, and the TV show, I think the characters were spot on. Tom Hiddleston and Claire Danes did such a fantastic job. The Doctor was so amazing. He was our favorite character, but they definitely kind of like sensationalized it, and like, it was a very weird, complicated plot in the book, and maybe it was because it wouldn't adapt as well for a screen, but they definitely kind of like heightened drama of certain bits, and they changed the storyline in places quite a lot. See what they did with the girl the vicar's daughter's friend. I cannot remember her name. I don't know that I love what they did with her, but I kind of get it. I don't know. I enjoyed it as a whole. I think it's like a solid adaptation, especially in the beginning. It was just so, the vibes were there, the setting was there, the costume was there, it was all there. It made it more dramatic than it was in the book, and I kind of missed the book and how quirky and like very deeply layered and interesting and lifelike, and I miss those elements for this like sensationalized, dramatized version. I would recommend it on the whole though, and I enjoyed it. I definitely think there's much worse adaptations out there. It did make me look at some characters differently though, which I thought was really interesting. Like the Doctor, I had such a different perspective on him, but to be fair, in the book I imagined him old and he wasn't old in the TV show, and I think that made the world of difference. Yeah, those are all the books and TV adaptations that I read in March. I'd love to know your favorite book that you read in March in the comments down below. And that is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Shade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!